Hey everybody, my name's Dave. Welcome to Party Political Puffin.
1, 2, 3.
Just 2 days after the Senate voted to acquit President Trump on 2 articles of impeachment, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, a National Security Council official who testified against the president during the impeachment hearings, has been fired from his job over at the White House. Vindman's brother, Eugene, an attorney at the National Security Council, was also fired from his White House position.
Amongst some of my favourite films are those shown about whistleblowers. Whether it's the notion of the little guy sticking it to the man, or simply that it shows that an individual can put a stop to corruption, sometimes on a nation-changing scale, by defying the asymmetric power that's carrying out the corruption. It could all be just down to good writing, casting and directing. No, for me, it's being shown what it might look like to be able to stop harmful, unlawful, unethical and corrupt behaviour. Being able to see that the average Joe can stop and bring light to situations that can be as harmful as costing the lives of our fellow man. Hoping that I too would have the fortitude against the combined efforts of those seeking to harm society to be able to make that difference and do the right thing. Also, it's about being able to see that as a whistleblower, protected by law, we can all be assured that whilst it may be a difficult journey, ultimately we will have our liberty not interfered with, our families threatened or our jobs and reputations destroyed. There have been several very high profile whistleblowers around the world, but some of them so high profile and their actions so consequential that major movies were made about them. Here's a montage of some of the most famous cases that became those famous films.
Cell phones go in the microwave.
Dare I ask why?
It blocks UHF frequencies. There's something going on inside the government that's really wrong, and I can't ignore it.
How about we just start with your name, okay?
My name is Edward Joseph Snowden.
This is a devastating security breach that was leaked out of the Pentagon. The most highly classified documents of the war.
Now the White House has been lying about the Vietnam War for 30 years.
Ben, I might have something.
It must be precious cargo.
It's just government secrets.
If you publish, we'll be at the Supreme Court next week. What will happen if we don't publish? The country will lose.
Unit 1 to Unit 2.
What?
We're home.
Base 1 to Unit 1. Base 1 to Unit 1.
Hold it, you mother! Hold it, police!
There's been a break-in at Democratic headquarters. They were bugging the place.
Mr. Markham, are you here in connection with the Watergate burglary?
I'm not here.
They follow the money. What do you mean? Where?
Oh, I can't tell you that.
But you could tell me that.
Just follow the money.
You're probably familiar with the three famous whistleblowers shown in the montage. Edward Snowden, along with various media outlets, primarily The Guardian, exposed, amongst many other programmes, the NSA's US domestic spying programme. Daniel Ellsberg, who worked for the Rand Corporation, worked with the Washington Post and the New York Times to bring light to the cover-up of the US's involvement in Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam, by 4 successive administrations over 30 years. However, the godfather of conspiracies and whistleblowing, until now, had been Watergate. Mark Felt, who was the Associate Director of the FBI, provided key details about the involvement of US President Richard Nixon's administration to Bob Woodward of the Washington Post, which ultimately led to the exposure and downfall of the administration and ultimately led to Nixon's resignation. Regardless of what personal feelings you have about these whistleblowers, it's hard not to imagine how dangerous it was for each of these people, and for that matter, any whistleblower. Well, lucky for us, we don't have to imagine, as we can see it played out publicly for us by Donald Trump as he takes revenge on any and all who dare to speak out against him. After the US Senate voted to acquit Trump on 2 articles of impeachment, that's a whole box set of videos on its own, he felt so emboldened as to send a clear message to anyone thinking of crossing him, particularly if you gave public testimony against him, even though the people that did give public testimony against him had been subpoenaed to do so, so had no choice. Unless, of course, you're a Trump official, when you can just ignore subpoenas. Whilst there are other forms of proof, documentary, physical, etc., perhaps the one we can all relate to the most, well, at least I can, due to too much watching Law and Order.
In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by 2 separate yet equally important groups: the police who investigate crime and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. These are their stories.
Is that of testimony directly from a witness. 2 of the people whose testimony was not a positive for Donald Trump was that of Gordon Sondland, who was the US ambassador to the EU, and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Both of these guys were dismissed from their White House positions. Just to make sure everyone gets the message, save for telling the truth when it doesn't suit Trump, your family get it too. Yeah, Trump dismissed Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman's twin brother, also Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny Vindman, from the White House too. It probably does go without saying Lieutenant Colonel Yevgeny Vindman had no part in, nothing whatsoever, to do with the Trump impeachment. The firing of Gordon Sondland and the reassignments of the Vindman brothers have shown that whilst whistleblowers may be protected, even though there are active campaigns to out the whistleblower at this very moment in time, the wider cast of players that can go to prove an allegation, or compelled witnesses as they can be usually known, they're not necessarily as fortunate. There is no doubt this will send a chill through the remaining staff of the White House. It may give any future fact holders pause from complying with any subpoena issued by Congress, let alone comply of their own volition, allowing further wrongdoing to simply go without investigation, let alone punishment. In a democracy, it's absolutely imperative that when wrongdoing by senior officials, whether in public or private offices and organisations, that there exists a policy that protects and allows lower ranked personnel, for want of a better term, to be able to officially report any wrongdoing they may be witness to or have knowledge of. This is simply to encourage people to come forward without the fear of retribution from their boss, or their boss's boss, or anyone further on up the chain in their organisation. Fortunately, apart from what should be self-evident, and that's someone taking the personal and what is demonstrably clear the wider risk to one's family of coming forward, should certainly be free from personal attacks whether those attacks are verbal, via social media, or unthinkably physical. There are whistleblower protections.
Yeah, I obviously wasn't happy with the job he did. First of all, he reported a false call. That wasn't what was said on the call. What was said on the call was totally appropriate, and I call it a perfect call. I always will call it a perfect call. And it wasn't one call, it was two calls. There were two perfect calls. There was no setup, there was no anything, and he reported it totally differently. We sent him on his way to a much different location, and the military can handle him any way they want. General Milley has him now. I congratulate General Milley. He can have him.
When you say that the military can deal with Vindman any way that they want,
yeah, well, it's up to them. He is over with the military.
Do you think he needs to face disciplinary?
That's going to be up to the military. We'll have to see. But if you look at what happened, I mean, they're going to certainly, I would imagine, take a look at that. But no, I think what he did was just reported a false call.
Of course, it's not just the US that's had its problems with corruption and misconduct by those in position of authority that needs to have a spotlight shone on it. The UK has had its share of needing whistleblowers to keep the public informed. Two of the most notable have been MI5 whistleblowers. For those outside of the UK that don't necessarily know what MI5 is, that's our internal security service. So somewhat akin to America's FBI. That's not quite a one-for-one comparison, but for this video, I think that will suffice. And this was back in the 1980s. Kathy Massiter and Peter Wright, they were both MI5 officers. Massiter spoke out about the MI5 spying on trade unions, which of course are made up of just UK citizens, civil liberties groups, which of course are made up of just UK civilians, and of course CND, which is was the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, once again made up of just UK citizens. Peter Wright wrote a book, famous book, called Spycatcher, and in it, amongst other things, he outed the UK Secret Service, which I'll just explain is also called MI6, and that is somewhat akin to the CIA. That's, again, not necessarily a one-for-one comparison, but it will do for this explanation. So the Secret Service were plotting to oust Harold Wilson, who was the Prime Minister. Think about that. Just think about that. There's a service that is there to protect the United Kingdom from external and internal threats. And they are spying on UK civilians whilst they go about their lawful everyday lives. And we've got non-elected officials just deciding that an elected Prime Minister should just be gone. The great news is that there are people willing to stand up, take the brave decision to blow the whistle and to help to keep these sorts of events from coming to fruition. So, should this discourage people from coming forward? It would be idiotic to argue that this very public display of getting even and then some by the most powerful man on the planet would not put the frighteners on the most resilient of us, making us consider, should I put myself and my family potentially through something like this? It seems clear that whether you are a potential fact holder or indeed a whistleblower, people in that situation need clear and unequivocal knowledge that they will be protected. The solution has to be in holding the system to account. When there's no protection for those that can make a case or even provide exculpatory testimony, then they are exposed to potentially having their lives ruined, and for what, some might argue. The US House of Representatives have had some mild words about doing something, maybe. The UK has recognised that PIDA is the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which came into law in 1998, and that relates directly to whistleblowing. It is no longer fit for purpose. The cross-party committee that's been looking into this has produced a report. The report's excellent, and I would advise anybody that has a mild interest in democracy to have a read of this. And I'll leave a link in the description below so that you can find it easily. They've created a 10-point plan, and here are just a few of those recommendations that you would think should already be self-evident. Remarkably, the term whistleblower must be defined in law. Yep, it's not actually defined in law. Amazing. The legal definition of whistleblowing should be revised and include any harmful violation of integrity and ethics, even when they're not criminal or illegal. Whistleblower protections should include protection against retaliation. Non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, in whistleblowing cases must be banned. There should be an urgent review of the prescribed persons list, a more comprehensive guide to their role and measures put in place to ensure that they fulfil their responsibilities. And perhaps for those outside the UK, the prescribed persons list is a long list, not long enough, of bodies or people that if you think you've seen wrongdoing and you don't know who to tell outside of your own company, you refer to this list. You could pick up the phone, engage via email and say, I think this is a problem, and they can help you from there. They've also recommended the introduction and the establishment of an independent office for the whistleblower with real powers, allowing it to set standards, enforce the protections, and administer meaningful penalties to not only companies or organisations, but people within those companies or organisations. In the UK, the official term for whistleblowing is making a disclosure in the public interest. I'd like to think that that is so self-evident from those few words as to why society needs whistleblowers that it doesn't need further clarification or discussion. In the public interest is talking about the many, not the few. However, whenever there is someone with an agenda or a profit to be made that leads to corrupt behaviour, there will always be a vested interest in silencing anyone that may come forward. The United States founders, Thomas Jefferson principally, wrote in the Declaration of Independence what Abraham Lincoln called a rebuke and a stumbling block to tyranny and oppression. Man, I wish I could speak like that. So Jefferson and the other founders, but as I say, principally Jefferson, wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness will all require that there are no government contracts given out for kickbacks, that companies aren't pouring toxic waste into the waterways, that regulations making sure that food for human consumption meets a minimum standard aren't watered down or completely rolled back, or that criminals aren't going to be protected from serving their sentence after being found guilty of, say, tampering with witnesses, lying to an official body, and obstruction, because they're mates with a certain powerful official. Jefferson goes on to say that any government gains its power from the consent of the governed, and should said government become destructive of these ends, as he puts it, that it is the right of the people to alter or abolish that government and remake it in such a way that's most likely to affect their safety and happiness. One of those ways to ensure government and private companies and corporations, for that matter, are acting in our best interests is for the people to come forward and make known corruption, criminal offences, environmental damage caused, to promote transparency, compliance and fair treatment for all, regardless of the power they may have. Protecting whistleblowers and the associated fact holders through legislation that is clear and unequivocal should be only the start. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi there. Once again, thanks for watching the video. Now comes the part where I'm going to ask you to help the channel out. If you could, hit the like button for this video, comment, let me have your thoughts, share it with somebody that you think would get value from it, subscribe so that you get all the future content. However, please remember to click on the bell icon. What would really help the channel out in a tangible way is if you could consider becoming a patron of the channel. If you visit patreon.com/Party Political Puffin, just take a look. That would be great. Once again, thanks for your support, and I'll see you in the next one.